Look at any courthouse in America. Look at the statue standing in front of the Supreme Court building in Washington. Who do you see? A blindfolded woman? In one hand, a scale. In the other, a sword. Every day, millions of Americans pass by this statue, not knowing her real name, not knowing her real story, not knowing that she is more than just a symbol. She is one of the oldest and most powerful deities in all of Greek mythology. Her name is not Justice. Her name is Themis. And she didn't just represent justice, she was justice. Themis established laws that governed not only humanity, but the gods themselves. She sat at the right hand of Zeus. As you can see, all powerful women were close to Zeus. Her lips spoke with an authority that even the king of the gods respected. Themis was there before the Olympians came to power. She will be there long after the last courthouse crumbles to dust. This is her real story. And by the end of this video, you'll never pass by this statue the same way again. Ready to dive into the world of Themis? Friends, let's take a stroll through the pages of history. Let's begin with who Themis really is, because the reality is far more extraordinary than the symbol most people know. Themis is a titaness, one of the most ancient deities in Greek mythology, belonging to the generation that preceded the Olympians. She is the daughter of Uranus, the sky, and Gaia, the earth. Her parents are the most fundamental forces of the physical universe, and from this cosmic foundation, Themis inherited something equally fundamental, the very principle of divine order. Her name, translated from ancient Greek, means two things at once. It signifies divine law, the eternal, immutable principles of good and evil, existing independently of any human legislation. And it signifies that which is laid, the foundation, the basis, that upon which everything else is built. This dual meaning is crucial. Themis is not simply a goddess who makes rules. She is the goddess who embodies the idea that good and evil exist at all, that the universe is not random or chaotic. Do you think the universe came into being by chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. There are principles, deeper than any human law, more ancient than any human civilization, that determine how everything should be. The ancient Greeks called these principles Themis, using her name as a common noun. When something was Themis, it was right, correct, in accordance with divine order. And when something wasn't Themis, when it violated the deepest principles of justice and proper conduct, the consequences were inevitable. Because Themis, unlike human judges, is never wrong, and she never forgets. Of all the relationships in Greek mythology, the so-called partnership between Themis and Zeus is one of the most fascinating and often misunderstood. Most people consider Zeus the highest authority in Greek mythology, the king, the ruler, the one whose word is final. And in many ways, this is true. But here's a fact most don't know. Zeus didn't rule alone, and the advisor he trusted most, those who sat at his right hand, those he consulted before making the most important decisions, was Themis. In ancient sources, Themis is described as Zeus's second wife, after his first wife, Metis, the goddess of wisdom, and before his final and official wife, Hera. But calling her simply wife greatly understates her role. Themis was Zeus's advisor, his guide, the voice of divine law in his ears when he was tempted to act out of anger or pride rather than justice. Ancient poets describe her as sitting next to Zeus on Olympus, not below him, not behind him, but right next to him. Perhaps they were a couple who ruled everything together. What do you think? Themis was Zeus's equal in dignity, if not in brute force. It was she who summoned the gods to assembly. When Zeus needed to convene a divine council to discuss matters of cosmic importance, it was Themis who sent the signal. She was the keeper of divine protocol, the one who ensured that proper order was maintained even among the gods. Today, she might be called a secretary to the celestial chancery, and Zeus listened to her. This is perhaps the most remarkable thing. The king of the gods, subordinate to no one, possessing the power to move mountains and calm the sea, yielded to Themis, not out of weakness, but because he understood what every truly wise ruler understands: power without justice is not strength, it is chaos. Themis kept Zeus connected to something greater than himself, and in doing so, she preserved the integrity of the entire cosmic order. The entire world hung on her scales of justice. Now let's talk about the influence of this powerful woman. Themis didn't simply rule over the gods. Her influence on humanity was direct, profound, and world-changing. The ancient Greeks credited Themis with bestowing upon humanity the three most fundamental gifts of civilization. The first gift was law, not specific laws, not the specific rules of any particular city or king, but the concept of law itself, the idea that human societies should be governed by principles, not the whims of whoever might prove strong. Before Themis, in the mythological understanding of human history, might was considered right. The strong did what they wanted, the weak suffered as they were required. Themis introduced another principle, that there is a right way for people to treat each other. This right way is not invented by any particular individual. It is revealed, it exists independently of us, waiting to be recognized and honored. This idea that law is revealed, not invented, that it reflects something real in the moral structure of the universe, is one of the most influential ideas in the entire history of human thought. At its core is the American Declaration of Independence, with its calls for self-evident truths and inalienable rights. At its core is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. At its core is any legal tradition that appeals to something more than mere political power. All of this goes back to the principle embodied by Themis. The second gift was assembly. Ancient sources credit Themis with creating the tradition of people gathering for discussion, debate, and collective decision-making. The agora, the public square in the center of every Greek city where citizens gathered to discuss community affairs, was her domain. Democracy itself, in its original Greek form, was exercised under her authority. But even here, things were not as you might imagine. Millennia will pass before we see democracy in its current form. The third gift was the oracle. Before Apollo became the god of prophecy at Delphi, the most famous oracle of the ancient world, Delphi belonged to Themis. She was the original keeper of the oracle, the original voice through which divine wisdom was transmitted to humanity. The tradition of turning to divine guidance when making important decisions, asking oneself not only, "What do I want?" but also, "What is right?" began with her. Three gifts: law, assembly, and divine guidance. Three pillars of human civilization, all from Themis. Let's take a moment to consider Themis at Delphi, for this part of its history is both historically fascinating and almost completely unknown to modern audiences. Share in the comments what you know about Delphi and whether you've ever heard of it. In ancient Greece, Delphi was considered the center of the world. The Greeks called it Omphalos, the navel of the earth. According to myth, it was here that Zeus released two eagles from opposite ends of the earth, and they met directly above Delphi, marking it as the heart of all creation. And Delphi housed an oracle, a voice through which divine wisdom spoke to the human world, a kind of inner voice of the earth or the universe. Kings and generals, philosophers, and ordinary citizens came from all over the Mediterranean to ask the oracle their most pressing questions. The oracle's answers determined the course of wars, founded colonies, and changed the course of history. Today, most people associate this oracle with Apollo, the god of the sun, music, reason, and prophecy, and Apollo was indeed the god of Delphi during the classical period of Greek history. But ancient sources are clear. Before Apollo, Delphi belonged to Themis. She was the original oracle, the primordial voice of divine truth at the center of the world. She sat in the sacred place and transmitted the will of the cosmos, not just predictions about the future, but also instructions about what was right, what was just, what was in accordance with the divine order. When Apollo eventually seized the oracle at Delphi, in some versions of the myth, by killing the great serpent Python that guarded it, he did not displace a minor deity. He took over the sacred place of one of the most ancient and powerful forces in the universe. We find it hard to believe that Apollo could have had a conflict with Themis. But in mythology, every version has its place. What do you think? We look forward to hearing from you in the comments. And even after Apollo became the god of Delphi, Themis remained. Ancient sources describe her as still present, still influential, still a deeper principle underlying the oracle's wisdom. Apollo gave prophecies, but Themis was the law that gave them meaning. Like Mnemosyne before her, Themis expressed her power through her children, and Themis's children are among the most important figures in all of Greek mythology. Themis, along with Zeus, had two groups of divine daughters whose influence on the universe was immeasurable. The first group are the Horae goddesses, of the seasons, and proper timing. In the most ancient traditions, there were three: Eunomia, whose name means law or order; Dike, whose name means justice; and Irene, whose name means peace. Look at these three names together: law, justice, peace. Themis's daughters are not just abstract concepts. They are the coherence of civilization itself. Law comes first, the establishment of right order and proper behavior. From law comes justice, the fair treatment of every person within this order. And from justice comes peace, harmony, which is possible only when people believe they will be treated fairly. This sequence, order, justice, peace, is as relevant today as it was 3,000 years ago. Every stable society in human history has followed precisely this pattern. Every society that has collapsed has done so because this sequence was disrupted, because order turned into oppression, justice into privilege, and peace became impossible. Themis instilled this truth in her daughters long before any political philosopher put it into words. Themis's second group of daughters was even more powerful: the Moirai, Clotho, who spins the thread of every human life; Lachesis, who measures its length; Atropos, whose name means she who cannot be changed, who cuts the thread at the appointed moment. The Moirai are perhaps the most absolute forces in all of Greek mythology. They answer to no one, not Zeus, not a single Olympian. Even the king of the gods cannot change what the Moirai have decreed. And they are the daughters of Themis. This tells us something profound about how the ancient Greeks understood justice. True justice, the deepest, most cosmic form, is something that cannot be discussed, appealed, or avoided. It is woven into the very fabric of existence. It is inevitable, not because someone imposes it, but because the universe is designed that way. Themis didn't simply administer justice as a principle. She created its inevitability. All branches of the tree of justice belong to Themis. Themis appears at one of the most pivotal moments in Greek mythology, a moment whose consequences would change the entire ancient world. Even before the Trojan War began, before a single ship had set sail, before a single arrow had been fired, Themis was already involved, because the Trojan War didn't begin with Paris abducting Helen. It began with a decision that Themis helped make. The goddess Thetis, a sea nymph of extraordinary beauty, was the object of the courtship of both Zeus and Poseidon. Both gods desired her for themselves. But Themis knew something important. There was a prophecy that Thetis would bear a son superior to his father. So this can be confusing. We were talking about daughters earlier. So where did the son come from? Themis revealed this prophecy. She warned Zeus and Poseidon that if either of them sired a child with Thetis, that child would ultimately overthrow them, just as Zeus had overthrown his father, Cronus. That's how a clever woman used her word. Because of Themis's warning, both gods retreated. Instead, Thetis married the mortal hero Peleus, and their son, the child who would have overthrown a god, instead became the greatest mortal warrior who ever lived. His name was Achilles. Yes, you've certainly heard that name. Without Themis's intervention, without her willingness to speak the bitter truth, to utter a prophecy no one wanted to hear, there would have been no Achilles. And without Achilles, the Trojan War as we know it would never have happened. Themis, as always, acted not by force, but by truth. She stopped Zeus, not by opposing him. She stopped him by showing him what was right and believing that wisdom would prevail. And so it happened. Now let's bring justice into the present day, because she is, quite literally, everywhere. Today, you'll find a statue of justice in almost every lawyer's office. Let's start with the most obvious place: the statue. The figure of justice, blindfolded, holding scales and a sword, stands in front of courthouses across the United States and around the world. She stands before the Supreme Court in Washington. She stands at the Old Bailey in London. She stands in courthouses from Sao Paulo to Sydney. This figure is justice directly, unmistakably. Her image has been a constant presence in the Western legal tradition from ancient Greece, through Rome, through medieval Europe, and into the modern world. For over 2,000 years, people have placed her image at the entrance to places where justice is dispensed. As a reminder, as an aspiration, as a model, the blindfold deserves special attention. In ancient depictions, Themis wasn't always blindfolded. She didn't need to be. Because her divine perception was perfect. The blindfold was added in the medieval period, and it symbolizes something important. Justice must be blind to wealth, power, and social status. The scales must weigh evidence and principles, not the personality of the person standing before them. This is Themis, pure and simple, a goddess who sat beside Zeus, not because of her allegiance, but because of what she represented. Justice that displays bias is not justice. It is simply another form of authority. Her influence extends beyond the courtroom. The very structure of modern democratic governance reflects her gifts. The Constitution of the United States and the constitutions of democratic countries around the world embodies the principle established by Themis. No person, no matter how powerful, is above the law. Law is subject to higher principles, rights, and truths that exist independent of the preferences of any government. The concept of natural law, a philosophical tradition that asserts that human rights are not bestowed by governments but are inherent in human nature, is a direct descendant of the divine order principle of justice. John Locke relied on it. Thomas Jefferson relied on it when he wrote that some truths are self-evident and some rights are inalienable. The International Criminal Court in The Hague, which prosecutes individuals for war crimes and crimes against humanity, regardless of their nationality or political power, is the institutional embodiment of justice. The idea that there are laws that transcend the laws of any particular nation, that certain violations of human dignity are unacceptable regardless of what any government says, this principle is alive and well in the 21st century. And in everyday American life, justice manifests itself in ways most people never notice. Every time a jury of ordinary citizens renders a verdict based on the evidence, not on who the defendant knows. Every time a judge rules against the government in favor of an individual citizen, every time a whistleblower exposes wrongdoing and receives legal protection for it. These aren't just legal mechanisms, they're an expression of a principle established by the Titaness at the beginning of time. That good exists, that evil exists, and that the difference between them matters, regardless of who wields power and who doesn't. So, what does justice actually teach us right now in the world we live in today? I think it teaches us many things, but three main components stand out. First, justice is not a human invention, it is a discovery. This is of paramount importance. If justice is something that powerful men decide, if good and evil are simply what the majority votes for, or what the strongest force imposes, then justice has no basis. It can be changed, redefined, or simply overturned by those in power. But if justice is something real, something that exists independently of any particular person's preferences, something that can be recognized and violated, then it has weight. Then it's unfair means more than I don't like it. It means it violates something real. Justice is the ancient world's way of saying justice is real, it has weight, it has authority, and no power can make the unjust just. Second, order, justice, and peace are inseparable. Themis's daughters, Eunomia, Dike, and Irene, are not three separate gifts. They are one gift passing through three stages. There can be no true peace without justice. There can be no justice without order. And order without justice is not civilization. It is oppression in the guise of civilization. Every social movement in American history that fought for greater justice, from the abolition of slavery to the civil rights movement and the ongoing fight for equal treatment under the law, has performed the work of Themis. They insisted that the order in which they live truly ensured justice, because without justice, peace is impossible. Third, justice requires courage. Themis was not a goddess of comfort. She spoke truths to Zeus that he did not want to hear. She revealed prophecies that disrupted the plans of the most powerful beings in the universe. She sat next to those in power and said, "Sometimes you make mistakes. This requires courage." And in the human world, justice has always required the same courage. The courage of a judge who makes the right decision when it's politically inconvenient. The courage of a witness who tells the truth when it would be easier to lie. The courage of an ordinary citizen who stands up and says, "This is wrong." Share your real stories in the comments if you've had any. Themis doesn't promise that justice is easy. It only promises that it's real and that it matters. Themis has stood at the gates of human justice for 3,000 years, perhaps much longer. She was there even before Zeus took his throne. She sat at his right hand and kept him in check, tying him to something greater than power. She gave humanity the concept of law, the tradition of assembly, and the voice of divine truth. She gave birth to the seasons, justice, and fate itself. And today, right now, her image stands before the Supreme Court of the United States, before the courthouses of every democratic nation on earth, a woman with scales and a sword, reminding everyone who enters that what happens within these walls must be more than politics, more than power, something real. She is not just a symbol, she is a standard, a reminder that justice is not a convenience, but a foundation, that without it, everything else ultimately crumbles. The next time you pass by her image, in a courthouse, on a coin, in a textbook, stop for a moment. Look at her. She's been waiting for you to notice her for a long time. If this story touched you, subscribe. We have a whole series of articles about remarkable figures from ancient mythology who still shape the world we live in today. Leave a comment below. Where do you see Themis' influence in the world around you today? How does Themis influence you personally? I read every comment. Until next time, stand up for what's right.